Hello, everyone. This PowerPoint presentation will discuss imprisoned pregnant and parenting women, analysis of social justice, healthcare policy, and practice. The significance of this PowerPoint presentation is to discuss a health disparity population, a population that medical public health needs is not being met. Um, Even though the focus in this particular presentation is on women of color, as they tend to have the highest disparity outcomes related to perinatal, which is consistent with prenatal and postpartum care. We know that in general, women of color are at higher risk for morbid maternity outcomes. That being said, African American women, particularly, are at highest risk of death due to perinatal healthcare and pregnancy. We know specifically that the District of Columbia has the highest maternal mortality rate in the nation, in the country. There are the development of a lot of maternal mortality review committees that are examining the losses of pregnant women to try to understand what are the systemic issues and public health issues associated with these losses. And so, again, even though this particular presentation is focusing specifically on pregnant and parenting women, it is very important that you understand that Black women are dying at two times the rate. They're delivering premature infants um, two times the rate of other racial groups. In addition, there are also some concerns with Pacific Islander, Native American Pacific Island women, and Latino women who also do not have very good perinatal outcomes. So again, just want to start this presentation talking about the poor outcomes related to maternal child health, particularly related to women of color. Hopefully, this presentation will increase your awareness of these outcomes and also be aware that this is considered a disparity group. Attendees will understand the pathways for incarceration rates for pregnant women. And they will also understand the grand challenges of social work and how they apply, including the 2017 NASW Code of Ethics. Participants will also learn the practice and policy needs to address this growing problem. And so, what are some of the statistics? In the last 30 years, women have been the most rapidly growing criminal justice population. Women comprise approximately 7% of the prison population. Between 1970 to 2014, there has been an 18% increase in the female county and city jail inmate population. Approximately 1.2 million women are involved in the overall criminal justice system. So we are seeing a rise in the amount of women being incarcerated. 37% of female inmates meet the federal poverty level with incomes of less than $600 a month, 1 month prior to arrest, one study showed. And 20% of women cited public assistance as their primary income source upon prison entry. We also know that there's an overrepresentation of African Americans in prison, and this overrepresentation is disproportionate to their relative numbers in the United States. The imprisonment rate for African Americans remains two times higher and 1.2 times higher for Hispanic women than for Caucasian women. Also, most women entering prison are primary caregivers upon entry and plan to return to this role once they are released. 65% of incarcerated women are parents of children under the age of 18, and approximately 5% of women are known to be pregnant at jail intake, and about 3 to 4% at prison intake. The increase of the amount of women being incarcerated, particularly women who are parenting and pregnant, is a family crisis. When we think about this, it is an erosion of family structures as many women are the primary caregivers to children. The mass incarceration of women, and pregnant and parenting women, disrupts detachment bonds between the mother and child. It also can serve to potentially provide or to potentially damage family units permanently, as well as impair attachment. One of the things that we know that directly impacts um, attachment is prison policies that restrict visitation times and also telephone contacts. So this will reduce the ability of that particular pregnant and parenting mothers to be able to communicate and maintain those bonds with their children. Children are deprived of primary caregivers, and this separation can be permanent, particularly when children are in foster care. And that is just to highlight that oftentimes, if there are not family members to help care for children once the mother is incarcerated, it increases the chances that that child will enter into foster care. So if the restriction in the visitation of in prisons and jails and restriction related to telephone calls, if that child is then placed in foster care, which is also considered an institutionalized circumstance for children, you'll then have the child in foster care, in the institution of foster care, and the mother in the institution of a prison system, which will serve to continue to disrupt the attachment and add layers of challenges and difficulty with maintaining bonding, visitation, and relational um, status of that child and that mother. So now we're going to talk about the pathways to incarceration for these pregnant and parenting women. Oftentimes, substance use, mental health issues, childhood victimization, and trauma are pathways to incarceration. So what we know is that women, pregnant and women in general, and specifically pregnant and parenting women, one of the pathways or the many of the pathways that lead to incarceration is substance use. That particular person having mental health issues, that particular person being victimized as a child, and dealing with issues of trauma, again, which can be associated with childhood victimization or other type of trauma. We know that pregnant and parenting women who have histories of substance use, mental health issues, and childhood victimization or are dealing with trauma issues are at higher risk for being incarcerated. Substance use is the most common disorder for female inmates, followed by serious mental health illness and trauma. About 82% of incarcerated women met the lifetime criteria for drug and alcohol abuse and substance dependence, and 53% of women met the criteria for lifetime post-traumatic stress disorder. 43% met the criteria for lifetime serious mental illness. A similar study found that violent and seriously offending women in prison, about 67% of women use illegal substances 30 days prior to incarceration. 55% of women receive professional treatment for substance use at some point in their life, and 65% of women reported a need for substance use treatment. Increased risk of poor mental health, oftentimes from childhood victimization and adult trauma, predicted greater offending histories for female inmates. And so here you're starting to get a better idea of how the association or the links between substance use, trauma, and the need for treatment reported by women in the prison system. Incarceration oftentimes reinforces and perpetuates the trauma already in an already traumatized population. So again, as we know, trauma is a pathway to incarceration, but the incarceration itself is a traumatizing event. And so it almost serves to worsen the trauma for that particular woman. So again, think about someone who may have a childhood history of trauma, or who may be dealing with a domestic violence situation, or different traumas experienced by that particular female inmate, and then have to add on top of those traumas with an incarceration. Um, and, and, and and there are many ways in which women can feel traumatized by the incarceration process. Not only being removed away from their family and children, being worried about their children, having or witnessing their children being placed in foster care due to their incarceration can be traumatic as well. But the actual incarceration itself poses a lot of traumatic risk for women. Women are more likely to be sexually victimized in jail, 27% by inmates and 67% by staff. That's staff in prisons. Trauma is often reactivated due to prison policies, surveillance by male staff for inmates, daily routines such as showering and toileting, full body searches that can occur in these facilities. Prison also exacerbates existing mental health issues, increasing the risk of reincarceration and reactivating the pathway. So again, if trauma can lead to incarceration, and if that woman has a history of trauma and is then incarcerated, and that adds to the layer of trauma, that also increases the chances that they will be um, sent back to jail or reoffend. So reincarceration, just due to the multiple traumatic experiences build up with that particular. The rise in incarceration is due to national drug policies that mandate prison terms for low-level offenses. States are incarcerating pregnant and parenting women based on biopsychosocial concerns. There are specific statutes designed for pregnant substance using women. Um, and those statutes are being used to prosecute and imprison pregnant and parenting women. So instead of having laws on the books in many states that penalizes or criminalizes substance use in pregnant women, a lot of states are now using drug laws not intended for substance use and or substance abuse and applying those laws to pregnant and parenting women. So for example, in some states, a woman who tests positive while pregnant for substance is charged with um, providing substances to a minor, which is a statute that is meant to penalize um, drug dealers for selling drugs or substances to minors and youth. It was not intended to be applied to women who are pregnant and parenting with substance use disorders and or having challenges with substance addiction. But because there are no laws on the book specifically for substance using women, they are using laws that were intended to prosecute drug dealers to incarcerate women for having addiction problems related to substance use. And so we know that there's a social justice issues related to our national drug policies and how they disproportionately send people of color and poor people. And now we're seeing pregnant and parenting women in jail. Again, oftentimes for having substance use disorders. Also, the social justice concern here is that we are criminalizing substance use and substance addiction. Oftentimes, these people need treatment and care and specifically substance use treatment, which are considered biopsychosocial concerns. Oftentimes, these women need mental health treatment to deal with the trauma and childhood victimization. But instead of giving them the treatment that they need for mental health and substance use, we're using prison systems as treatment. And we're criminalizing behavior, and this is a social justice. Addressing the biopsychosocial needs of pregnant and parenting women is the needed response, not a criminal justice solution. Adding to the social injustice, women are often imprisoned wrongly because many states do not have specific remedies for this problem, as mentioned before. Conveniently borrowing existing drug laws and policies, applying and misinterpreting them in cases involving pregnant and parenting women is a social justice issue. The Association of Women's Health, Obstetric and Neonatal Nurses, AWON, supports universal screening of substances in pregnant women, but opposes laws and reporting requirements that result in incarceration of pregnant women based on substance use disorders. The National Perinatal Association identifies the criminal justice response as discriminatory, counterproductive to the goals of maternal child health, and a significant deterrent for pregnant women seeking health care. So many associations and organizations promote universal screening for substance use for the goal of getting women treated, not for the goal of incarcerating. So we don't want to test women for substance uses in a way that penalizes them for substance use, which the current child welfare laws and criminal laws result in. What we would like to see happening is that the treatment and the screening occurs to get that WOM help. So what we find is that plenty pregnant and parenting women will avoid going to prenatal care just to reduce the chance of being screened and testing positive for substances. So they're trying to avoid the criminal justice response, but then also putting themselves at risk from a perinatal standpoint by not receiving the needed prenatal care that they need. And so these are some of the policies that address this issue. Shackling policy. The Prison Birth Project states that most medical and professional organizations agree that restraining women during childbirth and after is dangerous because it limits balance and mobility, increases the risk of falling, which can cause placental abruption, hemorrhage, or stillbirth, blood clots, and interferes with the medical provider's ability to provide care and standard of care and when there are emergencies, standard and emergency care. So this basically is saying that when you shackle a mother, and I'll go into reasons why that is occurring, it disrupts the medical provider's ability to provide standard care and emergency care when needed. The concern is that as an incarcerated individual, whenever you are leaving the prison or jail system, you are shackled. You may have seen this, see people being transported from one place to another. You see usually those prison buses, and people are shackled. For healthcare reasons, oftentimes inmates require healthcare, and they still specialize care, and you may see them in doctors' offices or receiving certain type of treatment, or sometimes they're sent to hospitals for certain treatment and care as well. But when they're seeing those providers, particularly pregnant and parenting women, if they're receiving if they're delivering their babies or they go into labor, they are then sent to a hospital to deliver. The same shackling policies for all inmates are applied to pregnant and parenting women. So they're shackled en route to the hospital while they're in labor. They are also shackled to the bed in the labor and delivery room. So a pregnant woman has to be chained to the bed while she's delivering the baby. The concern with those type of shackling policies and restraints is that the woman is shackled by the wrist and by the ankle, and it's not a lot of room to move. This can cause a woman to fall, a pregnant woman to fall. If she falls coming down, walking down the steps of the bus or trying to get in the bed because of these shackles, her placenta can abrupt. She can start to bleed, and it increases her chances of delivering a stillbirth child. Those shackles also increase the risk of blood clot. Also, when a person is shackled to the bed, if there is an emergency with that delivery in any kind of way, the providers may not have full access to that woman if she is shackled. If she needs to be taken to an OR, if she's needed to get a C-section, and then shackles need to be removed. Oftentimes, these are time-sensitive situations. So in those emergency situations with those shackles on, it limits medical providers' ability to provide care. Also, again, standard care is also compromised as well. Shackling policies elucidate that prisons are not developed for delivery of healthcare services and are ill-equipped with the infrastructure required for interdisciplinary staff to address the needs of pregnant and postpartum women. And so, because these shackling policies exist, because there's been no understanding or conceptualization that these policies are inappropriate, particularly with pregnant and parenting women, this is just another example of prison systems not being the ideal place for pregnant and parenting women, and particularly their unwillingness to To uniformly address and remove this policy also makes it clear that prison systems are not appropriate places for pregnant and parenting women. The Rebecca Project for Human Rights published a state-by-state report card examining federal policies and the conditions of confinement for pregnant and parenting women and its effect on children. The report card analyzes these key areas: prenatal care, shackling, alternative sentencing programs, prison nurseries, and whether policies help or harm women. According to the report card, 21 states receive a D or an F based on those criteria. 22 states are given a grade of C. 7 states obtain a grade of B, and only one state received a grade of A. This report card supports concerns that prisons generally do not provide optimal care to pregnant and parenting women. The Dignity Act, you can click on this PowerPoint here and it will bring up information regarding the Dignity Act. It's very important. When you have time, please look at that. But the Dignity Act for incarcerated and pregnant women seeks to improve the treatment of women through contact with children, reentry, and healthcare services. So it tries to improve or maintain those attachment bonds and those relationships that are oftentimes disrupted within incarceration. It also tries to improve outcomes for these women so that reentry, they're not at a higher risk for reentry. If you remember, those pathways or substance use, those high risk pathways or substance use, mental health concerns, and trauma. And again, improve those healthcare services. There's also the Second Chance Act of 2007, which are grants to programs that seek to improve outcomes for individuals leaving prison and reduce recidivism. Now, the Second Chance Act program is not specifically for pregnant women, but it is to address outcomes of incarceration for all individuals who have been incarcerated. So now let's talk about the grand challenges of social work and how they apply to this social justice issue. The grand challenges of social work, and there are many, but the specific grand challenges that address this issue is promoting smart decarceration. Promoting smart decarceration impacts humans and economic prosperity through the reduction in overall incarceration. Eradicating social isolation. The grand challenges acknowledges that social isolation is deadly and endorses the need to strengthen social connections and reform solitary confinement in the criminal justice system. Achieving equal opportunity and social justice and reducing extreme economic inequality is another grand challenge. The grand challenge of achieving equal opportunity, such as education, employment, and social justice, addresses the need to support marginalized populations through combating prejudices, exposing unfair practices, racial and social justice. And so, as you can see, promoting smart decarceration directly applies to mass incarceration, and particularly mass incarceration of pregnant and parenting women. Eradicating social isolation helps us examine how we think about isolation and how it disrupts attachment, how it negatively impacts relational connections between mother and children, families, and also specific concerns with how prisons increases social isolation for those people who are incarcerated, and particularly those policies of solitary confinement in prison systems as well. We also know that people who are incarcerated, their economic um, um, outcomes are also compromised. So, social justice, we want to make sure that we are achieving equal opportunity and social justice. And from an economic standpoint, um, those opportunities for employment are reduced oftentimes when someone has an arrest record. We also know that there's a specific social justice issue here because we know that people of color and poor people are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. So this grand challenges, which talks about equal opportunity and social justice and reducing economic inequality, directly applies to this population as well for all the issues stated earlier in this presentation. The other social justice you want to think about is the laws that I discussed earlier that are misapplied to pregnant and parenting women. And the other thing you want to think about here is how we are applying a criminal justice response to issues of mental health and substance use. Again, another social justice issues. And this again aligns directly with this particular grand challenge. Healthy Development for All Youth. Healthy Development for Youth Grand Challenge examines the mental health and development needs of youth. The focus is to reduce severe mental, emotional, behavioral problems for approximately 6 million youth annually. This this ties into lack of parenting and caregiving by the mother, disruption of the family through the incarceration process. So, healthy development for all youth applies to this issue as well. And closing the health gap grand challenge. Closing the health gap grand challenge identifies the need for adequate basic health care void of health disparities, poverty, discrimination, and adverse environments that further erodes health. As I discussed in this presentation, there are major health issues that are not being met by pregnant and parenting women. I didn't go into so much detail, but oftentimes these women go into labor in the prison system and do not make it to the hospital. Women are not getting the primary care or the prenatal care that they need. The nutrition needs are not met, which their nutrition needs of pregnant women are more higher or more enhanced than regular people, but they're not getting the nutritious meals that they need to sustain healthy pregnancy. The water supply is not good, if not, is contaminated. Again, compromising healthy delivery, not to mention the stress of the incarceration and the shackling policies themselves. A lot of women reported not having access to sanitary environments during their pregnancy in prison. Oftentimes, not having feminine products as well in prison systems, not having good access to that as well. So again, closing the health gap here speaks directly to pregnant and parenting women in healthcare, in prison systems, and the lack of appropriate standard health care that all pregnant and postpartum women should receive, because women have to return back to the prison after they deliver. And so think about a woman who needs a certain type of care and cleanliness because she just had a baby, having to return to an unsanitized prison cell. Also think about women who have C-sections, that require a different level of care and sanitation, having to return back. That increases her risk of potentially getting an infection and or bleeding outcomes as well, or hemorrhages. So what are the implications for practice and policy? The Second Chance Act, Pregnant Women Dignity Act are all policy implications. These are ones that I want you to take time to read more about. But these policies are trying to improve the outcomes for pregnant and parenting women in prison systems. Pretrial supervision and release practices. These are policy implications, and so what these policies do is try to avoid incarceration by offering alternative options, such as pretrial supervision, so that a person does not have to be incarcerated, and release practices, so that an effort to release pregnant and parenting women or any inmate from prison, so that they can um, not be impacted by those issues I identified earlier. So early release practices that are safe to the community, pretrial supervision services to avoid incarceration, pre-arrest crisis intervention programs. These are programs that are meant to be proactive to address issues such as mental health and substance use prior to arrest, so that the goal is to avoid arrest and avoid incarceration. Similar concept is problem solving court. So instead of incarcerating people as the answer for mental health, trauma, and substance use, and or even poverty, problem solving courts seek to understand what the problems are and try to get help and treatment to avoid incarceration. And also the National Commission on Correctional Health Care. Please review that website. They are oftentimes releasing statements and policy and guidance toward prison systems to improve healthcare services to inmates. The other thing we need to do is debunk myths and decriminalize women who need substance use and mental health support. oftentimes it's myths related to substance using populations, myths related to poverty, myths related to people of color, um, that increases incarceration rates. And so we need to debunk those myths. We also need to be aware that we are criminalizing people for substance use and mental health problems, which is not right. And so we need to decriminalize and put more focus on treatment. Interventions require a need for gender responsive programs, problem solving, and solution focused justice systems, and community based program alternatives to incarceration. Advocacy for adequate and appropriate health care for all women, but specifically for pregnant and parenting women. So we need more advocacy. I talked about some policy initiatives. The Second Chance Act would be something that medical social workers can advocate for. The Dignity Act is another policy that medical social workers can write to um, their their elected officials to try to support these type of policies. Um, Op-eds um, for me, doing presentations highlighting this issue as a form of advocacy, letting our colleagues know that this is an issue, our social work colleagues know it's an issue. Education and awareness to the public. Trauma-informed care is critical in the criminal justice system. Because we know that trauma is key, is one of the key pathways, we need to do more trauma-informed care as we approach this population. There are also organizations that are involved in amicus briefs. These are friend of the court letters to try to get judges to dismiss cases that are brought for pregnant and parenting women for substance use. The goal of these amicus briefs is to um, condemn the use of existing drug laws to prosecute pregnant and parenting women with substance use um, disorders or addictions or problems. And so I have been involved in many amicus briefs where we, in professional organizations, we are sending letters to the court requesting that they dismiss the case because the law is being misapplied to pregnant and parenting women. And I am happy to share that in most cases, with this advocacy, with these letters to the court, the judges have dismissed many of these cases. Again, not to say that not to take a side on whether a woman using substances may or may not be considered criminal. What we are saying, though, is that until there's a law specifically put on the books to penalize it, you can't borrow laws that were not intended for that to prosecute women. Um, it is our hope as social workers that they do not create laws to penalize women for substance abuse or mental health. That is something that will go against our code of ethics. However, there's some people that feel substance use in pregnancy is criminal and should be addressed by criminal behaviors. There's maybe one or two states that have put laws specifically on the books to criminalize substance use in pregnancy. We're hoping that that is not a trend that continues. But what we do know, though, is that you cannot use a law that was not intended for pregnant and parenting women to penalize them for that. And so the code of ethics is what we use to consider how we govern this issue moving forward, as well as the grand challenges of social work. We talked about the code of ethics in this earlier on in this um, course. Please be sure to review that. Another um, standard of practice document you may want to look at also is the NASW Standards of Cultural Competence. It talks about how to provide culturally competent care to marginalized groups, vulnerable groups, discriminated groups, and particularly groups that are experience health disparities. And so, what are some of the ethical principles and values? Service, helping people in need address social problems. Social justice is an ethical principle and value of social work. We challenge social injustices. and dignity and worth of a person, respect the inherent dignity and worth of the person. So when we think about our code of ethics and our ethical principles and values that we want to apply to this issue, it's service, social justice, and dignity and worth of a person. Um, Commitment to clients, commitment to promote well-being of clients, cultural awareness and social diversity, the provision of services that are sensitive to client culture and differences. And so cultural awareness and social diversity is understanding that pregnant and parenting women are a specialized population. And so we need to make sure that the culture, our cultural awareness and response to the diversity issues specific in this population is clear. We also want to be aware that poor and people of color are the ones that are highest at risk for being incarcerated. And so this has direct implication on parenting and pregnant women. Also the cultural and social diversity issues related to this has to do with mental health challenges, as most of these women are dealing with mental health issues and substance use. So we need to understand that and bring that cultural awareness and those diversity issues to play when we think about how to improve outcomes from a practice and policy standpoint. Social welfare, responsibilities to the broader society. So our code of ethics say that social workers we have a responsibility to the broader society. So this issue is a social welfare issue. We want to promote the general welfare of society. And so mass incarceration in general and mass incarceration of pregnant and parenting women is a social welfare issue. Public participation, facilitate informed participation by the public in shaping social policy and institution. This is some of our ethical duties to the broader society as social workers. We also have a broader ethical responsibility to the broader society when it comes to social and political action. This action ensures equal access to resources and opportunities to meet the basic needs of people and to help them fully develop. Based on the issues that I brought up with mass incarceration, it becomes clear here that equal access to healthcare services, standard healthcare services, not being met. Access to resources for pregnant and parenting women are not being met as well. And we are not even meeting their basic healthcare needs. And this is jeopardizing their health outcomes for not only the mother, but also the baby. I hope this presentation is helpful. Again, it's to highlight a particular issue in maternal and child health. But as a reminder, incarceration is one issue. One another equally important issue that is getting a lot of attention is maternal mortality. Again, experienced often by women of color. But what we see more with maternal mortality is that it's not necessarily a socioeconomic phenomenon. Whether women are poor or of means financially, maternal mortality and morbid outcomes are still high risk. And we've learned that just with the Serena Williams incident and her being courageous enough to bring awareness to her experience with the birth of her daughter and the care that she received and how she felt hospital personnel was not listening to her and her concerns while she was in labor, which required her to have an incident in the hospital that could have been avoided, number one, and could have resulted in harm to herself and the baby. And so, again, maternal mortality is another area of maternal child health that we are looking at as well. But again, we find oftentimes that women of color are on the other end of these outcomes, whether it's maternal mortality or incarceration. But with incarceration specifically, we're seeing women who are poor, who are dealing with mental health, substance use issues, more at risk for poor outcomes and mass incarceration rates. And then overall, when you see health disparity outcomes, you see them being high, and where women of color, particularly Black women, whether it's maternal mortality, whether it's incarceration, they're seeing rates that are almost twice that of their counterpart when it comes to incarceration, mortality, delivering premature births, and so forth. I hope this was helpful in outlining some of the issues that we're having specifically in maternal child health. Thank you.